The C3 Corvette ran for many years, from 1968 all the way through 1982, to be more specific. And as the car continued to age, it did get a little bit long in the tooth. This obviously was an extended production cycle that likely was never intended to be, but was brought about by various economic challenges that General Motors had to deal with, and let's say precious capital had to go to other vehicles before it went to the relatively low volume Corvette. But all along the way, the C3 had a number of performance engines, especially in its earlier years, where you could get 427 cubic inch engines with 3 two-barrel carburetors making north of 400 horsepower, or a more tame 427, for example, that made 390 horsepower with a 4-barrel carburetor and hydraulic lifters. And if you wanted a hot little small block engine, 1970s LT1 V8 produced 370 horsepower from 350 cubic inches. Unfortunately, as the 1970s would go on, Corvette horsepower would generally continue to dwindle all the way through the 1975 model year, which represented the absolute nadir of Corvette base engine horsepower. In that model year, the base engine produced 165 horsepower from its 350 cubic inches, and the optional, the hottest engine that you could get in a Corvette for 1975 was 205 horsepower. That was the L82 V8. And as I mentioned, 1975 was really the lowest horsepower Corvette that you could buy. That 165 horsepower L48 engine, it would never get lower than that throughout the Corvette's history. However, there is one interesting engine that many people don't know about when it comes to the Corvette, and that was placed in the vehicle in 1980. And that is a 305 cubic inch V8 that made 180 horsepower, 15 more than that 1975 350 cubic inch V8, but still, like I said, I thought I would talk more about this one because many people don't know about it. A 5-liter Corvette, you say? I never knew that they produced a 305 cubic inch Corvette. Surely that can't be so. Well, yes, indeed it was. Now, before we talk more about the 5-liter V8 that was in the 1980 Corvette, let me just point out that it was in the Corvette for that one model year and one model year alone. That was it, 1980. It was not in 1979, not in 1981, not in any other year. In fact, in 1981, there would be just one Corvette engine that was available in Corvettes in all 50 states. There was not even an optional engine in 1981, and that would be the same for 1982 when the Crossfire fuel-injected V8 was introduced to the Corvette lineup. But 1980 was really a marquee year for Corvette for a number of reasons. The car got a new facelift, a new front-end fascia, some new looks out back as well. And this was really the first year where General Motors was actively trying to lightweighten the Corvette and take weight out of it. So a number of things had changed. The windshield as well as the door glass was thinner, and the T-tops were also lighter. The frame was made lighter. The differential and the rear end and the suspension were lightened as well. The net result was about a 250-pound weight loss for the Corvette, or about 7 or 8% of its weight taken out. Remember, this was the era of increasing fuel economy and emission standards, and both were really choking the horsepower and overall power of domestically produced as well as foreign-sourced vehicles in the United States. Now, as part of those emission standards, one of the issues that Chevrolet division encountered was that California had stricter rules than the rest of the continental United States when it came to engines and the pollutants that they emitted. And as a result, one of the things that Chevrolet found when it was trying to certify its 350 cubic inch V8 for emissions in California was that it just wouldn't pass. It was too polluting, if you will. And as a result, they had to put a different engine under hood in the Corvette. Now, this was something that was also the case at other GM divisions. For example, in 1980, Cadillac had a standard home-sourced 368 cubic inch V8 as its power plant. But if you got a Cadillac in California, or some of the Cadillacs in California, it would actually have a 350 cubic inch Oldsmobile V8. So during this time frame, it wasn't all that atypical for California cars to have different engines than the other cars that were sold in the remaining continental United States. But what is unique is that in this case, the Corvette had to make do with a 305 cubic inch V8 versus the standard 350 cubic inch V8. And it really didn't make all that much less horsepower. It made 180 horsepower compared to the 350 cubic inch V8, the standard one that made 190 horsepower. There was still an optional L82 that made 230 horsepower outside of California. But if you lived in California, you were stuck with a 305 cubic inch V8, 180 horsepower. And by the way, you were also stuck with an automatic transmission. You could not get a manual transmission Corvette in California. It's kind of similar to in 1982, you could not get a manual transmission Corvette anywhere in the United States. If you got the Crossfire V8, you were getting an automatic. Now, while the 5-liter V8 was only downhead 10 horsepower versus the 5.7-liter V8, it did suffer a bit more profoundly in the torque department, and it only made 255 pound-feet of torque compared to 280 pound-feet of torque for the 350 cubic inch V8. In base engine form, the L82 made 275 pound-feet of torque. A little less torque on the L82 engine than the base L48 engine. But regardless, the 5-liter V8, or frankly any of the engines, except for the L82 in the Corvette, wasn't going to get you in trouble, let's say, from a speed perspective. These cars were about, I would say, 9 seconds, 8.5 seconds, 0 to 60 cars. Not fast. I would say the 350, the base engine, was about an 8.5 second car. The L82, probably a high 7s, 7.5 to 8 seconds, 0 to 60 car. And then the 5-liter V is probably a 9.2-ish, 0 to 60 car. It's kind of sad for a Corvette, but these really were the dark days in terms of horsepower. It's unfortunate because the 1980 Corvette is actually a pretty refreshing facelift overall on a very tired car. This is a facelift that kind of kept the car going for 1980, 81, and 82, 3 model years until the 1984 Corvette would come out. There was no Corvette, at least no publicly available Corvette that was produced in 1983. So buyers would have to wait until 1984 for the C4 to come out. And by the way, that 1984 C4 still had the carryover Crossfire injection engine from 1982, although by this point you could get a manual transmission in 1984. It was just the Doug Nash 4+3 manual transmission. And for those who are not aware, we can make that the subject of another video, but you effectively had a 4-speed that had a computer-controlled overdrive unit that would automatically activate in second, third, and fourth gears if you were not accelerating very hard, and it would effectively reduce the engine speed. Kind of annoying and not great from a reliability perspective. On some of them, you could switch that feature off so that it wasn't always activated, but still, that was kind of an annoying feature. Later, the Corvettes would even have the skip shift in the 6 speeds, where it would force you to go from first gear to fourth gear unless you were accelerating with a decent amount of pace. And so there we have it, the story of kind of a woefully underpowered, sad Corvette that you had to buy if you were a California resident. That was just what you were going to get. You couldn't get anything more in 1980. And as I mentioned at the front end of the video, the 1980 5-liter Corvette actually wasn't the lowest horsepower V8 Corvette that was offered. That would go to the 1975 L48 engine Corvette that made 165 horsepower. Of course, when the Corvette was introduced back in 1953 with a Blue Flame 6, that engine had 150 horsepower. That was gross horsepower as well. There's 165 net horsepower in the 1975 Corvette. So the Blue Flame 6 was less horsepower, but that was many years ago when the Corvette was more about looks and less about sport. By this point, the Corvette was at least becoming a very sporty vehicle, and that 1975 L48 V8 was the least powerful V8 engine offered in the Corvettes. Although I suppose one could make an argument that the 1955 Corvette, which was the first year for the V8, it made 195 gross horsepower, maybe 195 gross horsepower was less on a net horsepower rating scale than the 1975 V8. But let's get into that another day. Put a comment in the comment section. Have you driven a 5-liter 305 cubic inch V8 Corvette? Let me know. I have not. I've only driven ones with the 5.7. I have driven a 1980 Corvette. And I have to say, the lightweighting of the car kind of ruins it a little bit for me. I think it became a little bit more of a rattle trap and noisier. They were trying to cut weight, and they took out all those items I previously mentioned. Plus, I think they thinned the sound insulation blanket. So while I like the looks of the 1980 Corvette, functionally, I would prefer a 79 or earlier. I think they're just better screwed together. So let me know what you think. Put a comment in the comment section. Thanks again for watching.